Cool, we're on.
Hey, welcome to the N2Growth live stream chat today. For those of you new to this platform, we do this every weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. We have 5 different channels, 5 different panels, 5 different topics. So if you have the time, if you're interested, join us. Today's panel, this channel is the elephant in the room. We're going to talk about things that lots of people think about, not too many people talk about. And even when they do talk about them, they kind of maybe talk about them in a muted level or a politically correct fashion. So we're just going to try and dig down a little bit deeper and have maybe a little bit more of an interesting conversation. Just real quickly in terms of table setting, brief introductions for my teammates on the call today. With us, we have Jaco Erasmus. Jaco is our EMEA CEO. One of my favorite people on the planet. Born in South Africa, currently resides in the Netherlands, started out his career as a clinical psychologist, moved into management consulting, then into executive search. Just one of the more talented people in the business. Also with us, we have Shana Thompson. Shana is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, a former active duty Air Force officer, MBA from Grantham, taught leadership at USC. She kind of keeps us honest, shakes us up a little bit. So glad to have Sheena on the line. And then Roosevelt Castro goes by Rue. Rue is a 7-year Apple veteran, so spent a lot of time at Apple, kind of leads a lot of our creative endeavors here and is really the creative thinker on the chat today. So with that said, we're going to dive into today's topic, which is employee engagement, and just kind of exploring employee engagement from the position of what is it really, and mostly what does trust have to do with engagement? Because I think that's where you either make or break engagement, is with a level of trust that either exists or doesn't exist. So with that, I'll just kind of tee it up. Shana, any thoughts on engagement and trust?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the intro and for setting the table for this conversation. I'm really excited to be able to dig a little deeper than just what is like usually acceptable or people feel comfortable speaking about with their chairman or with other people that they work with. I brought up trust, or when I thought about employee engagement, I think what came through to me very clearly was the importance of trust, because I think it's something that like everybody can acknowledge, but it's more difficult to actually define, and it's more difficult to put into action because it isn't just something that you can like do the same thing for everybody. There's no one size fits all for trust. It's like deeply personal for a lot of people to be able to establish that kind of relationship. And so how do you go about building trust in a professional environment? How do you basically build that connection?
You know, it's interesting. I've kind of always felt that trust kind of manifests itself based on actions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, how you act, how you treat people, the decisions you make, you know, all kind of validate or invalidate trust, right? And so I think, you know, what are people looking for when they're looking for trust? I mean, mostly it's kind of safety and security, right? If trust exists, then safety and security exists, then you can be vulnerable, you can have real conversations, you can have challenging conversations. But I think in a lot of environments, trust is kind of a risky thing too, right? It's like, you know, should I step out? Can I be authentic? Can I be transparent? I mean, what do you guys think about that?
Well, I think, Mike, most probably you can read my thoughts. I just, you know, we talked about the theme of trust yesterday. I was listening into to the talk show of Jim Houghton, Tim Dunn, Michael Kerouac, and Joseph Nicholas, and it reminded me actually of a time some time ago when I started as consultant at the Gemini Consultancy, and the very first thing that we've learned was the trust formula. And maybe you are, maybe you know the formula. I've actually written it down for those that's tuning in today. So this is the trust formula, which is it's really very much the equation of credibility times being interconnected with people. So if you have a real connection, intimacy, and it's not the intimacy that you have with your partner, but the intimacy in a company, being connected, it's something that you build over time. That you mix it up with credibility, something that you really earn within a company. It's like walking the talk. It's not only about what you do, but how you do it. That is really the mix making up trust. But the interesting thing is, and you just touched upon that, is the factor of risk, which really erodes trust. That's the one attribute that each one of us factor into a trusted relationship. It breaks down the relationship. So the higher the consistency and the credibility in a relationship, the higher the trust.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. I've always said, if you tell people that you don't trust them often enough, don't be surprised when they start to believe you, right? And so, how do you tell them that? You tell them that, again, with your actions, with what you do, with how you treat them. So, it's one thing to say that you trust somebody, then it's another thing to be micromanaging them every day.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a lot of, I don't know, information out there right now about over communicate. We're in a time of crisis, over communicate. I don't know, over communicating can be micromanaging. It can display a lack of trust. So, appropriate communication, empathetic, compassionate, timely, relevant communication, but maybe not communication solely for the sake of volume, right?
Yeah.
So, all messages contain that underlying theme. I mean, Rue, what's your take?
I don't know, because I'm thinking of the quote of trust is earned, not given. And it's not necessarily my train of thought, especially in a professional environment. I think you should always come with a mentality of having positive intent and start out with trust being that one thing that you have towards your peers, leadership, and vice versa. And I think you can lose the trust. You don't necessarily have to earn it. At least that's my approach. And I think that allows me, one, to be vocal, because I know even in this environment, like I can speak and be who I am in front of my chairman because there's this level of trust. Yeah. Now, if I do take action into consideration, if there were some actions taken that then get in the way of the trust that we have built, then my perspective may start to shift. So I think the discussion can be, should you start with trust at the forefront as opposed to having this mentality of it's something that needs to be earned? And in this professional environment and at the speed that things are moving, we cannot afford to wait 6 months to build trust.
Yeah.
No,
I think it's an interesting observation. Obviously, you some people have trust because of their position, and sometimes it's something that you earn. If I may tell a brief, if I may give a brief example of what I've experienced long ago as consultant. So we were working for this company. They big in chemicals. It's an international chemical company, and we were doing some analysis on which of the factories were really performing well, outperforming, and which ones were doing less well. And eventually, we came to the conclusion that one of these factories needed to be closed. Now, this is the interesting thing: breaking this news to that audience. So you have to have some level of trust, don't you? Especially because it's going to be bad news. Now imagine this. We had to decide who is going to break this news to the people working, the employees at the company. So there was the option of maybe the CEO or the managing director, the project director, one of the directors at the factory, or somebody else. So who do you think was the person designated to talk to the company employees about their factory being closed?
Oh, the least expected.
Well, you're right. Actually, it was none of them. It was one of the employees who worked in the project, who worked day and night, who helped making the calculations, who did the workshops, cried when they cried about what was happening. And this is a guy who came there with his rundown car, while all the employees was watching, drove in, and he stepped onto the stage and he broke the news. Now imagine, and we realized that later on, imagine, and this is somebody that earned the trust of the employees, being engaged. Remember the trust equation that we just talked about, being consistent, being connected, having credibility. Imagine if it was one of the other options that we had, maybe one of the managing directors driving in with his big company car, not even having been at the factory for some time.
Yeah, it's a great story. And I think, it's something that you can kind of apply across a lot of different things. It's who carries the message, how aligned is the message, does the message speak to the right people in the right way at the right time and produce the right outcome. And that I think if you overthink it and if you over engineer it, a lot of the authenticity and the transparency just kind of goes away, right? So I think what we're experiencing today in this modality, or what we're experiencing at large now, is it's more raw, it's more real, less production value, but you get to know people maybe at a little bit different level because we've all kind of been given permission space to communicate in ways that maybe a couple of months ago in some organizations, you couldn't do something like this. Now, we've been communicating like this for a long time, but lots of other organizations haven't. So I'm guessing that there's some struggling going on right now. There's some challenges that people are trying to figure out. How do you guys think this is going to impact, let's say, an organization that wasn't distributed, they weren't decentralized, they didn't use remote working, but now they're in this environment? Any advice for them? Any thoughts about what that ought to look like?
I'll take a crack at it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, please go, Ru.
Ru?
Oh, sure. I'll go ahead.
I'll pick that one up then, Ro, if you want to have some time to think about it. I had this discussion with an HR director, one of my good friends, the other day, and we talked about this is actually the theme. It's very close to employee engagement. I mean, how do you engage your employees, especially if you've done it in a different way in the past? People are used to get up in the morning, get in the car, drive to work, meet their colleagues, have the cup of coffee in the pantry, sit next to the computer and do their job, have a phone call, and suddenly it's very different. They have kids at home. There's the whole working environment is different, and it's sometimes it's in the little things. It's the little things that makes the difference. So what they are doing is really simple things like making sure each employee has a computer, and you would think that everybody has, but not everybody has. Have a computer, have good connectivity, maybe even pick up the remote costs for that connectivity, having an early morning prayer with the whole team, deciding what's going to happen, have the work day planned and the deliverables planned. And then also from a management perspective, so this HR director started to blog. And Mike, I know you're an excellent blogger, but he isn't. But the fantastic impact that had on the employees, suddenly people can follow. They start to see, they start to realize what a day in the life of an HR director is, or the day in the life of a CFO. So there's a big change and a shift in the way that employees are engaging in their companies, and those early adopters who were quick to spot the opportunity to engage in a different way, and maybe also in the digital age, they are the companies who will bear the fruit, I guess.
I think it is interesting. It's a transition, right? So we just had a comment come in from Jacqueline, and she was saying in some organizations, honesty and trust aren't welcomed. And I can't fathom, not wanting to hear from the three of you. If you have something that you want to say, if you have an opinion that you want to express, if you want to challenge a decision that I make, because I know it comes from the right place. I mean, it's an open, candid dialogue so that we all get better together. But what do you do in an organization where, that's not wanted? It's like, hey, just, do what I say, follow my orders, my way or the highway. This is how we operate, fall into line. I mean, Shayna, you got a military background, kind of help us out there.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I've worked with some really amazing leaders in the military who encouraged me to be creative and to think of new ways of doing things. But I definitely worked with individuals who would literally tell me, like, we've tried that already. There's no point in like trying to be innovative, try to be creative. Or you would have people who were just so like entrenched in their way, they wouldn't even like entertain someone else's thought process. And so it's very frustrating. It feels like you're working, it almost takes away the like point of showing up for work that day if you're just going to have to like go and do something the way someone else thinks it needs to be done. When you're told, like as an officer, I was like given responsibility, but it was so nebulous sometimes. And so trying to figure out and navigate that when you don't have that type of open communication or open relationship with the person you're working with, it's extremely difficult to stay motivated or to stay engaged. And it's not something that like, requires very much thought, or you just have to show up basically and like check the boxes, which is not very engaging at all.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think, there's a cultural aspect of this thing too, right? So culture either kind of happens by design or it happens by default. Mm-hmm. Culture is part of your strategy, or it's just something that kind of occurs. And I think if you don't focus on culture, you kind of get what you deserve, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of times when you're in a low trust environment, it's a high execution environment, right? It's just everybody's focused on the trains running on time, they're task oriented, and there's not a lot of room for creativity. There's not a lot of room for independent thought. It's just get this done now. And when you kind of get people out of that tactical level, lift them up, allow them to breathe into something, to lean into something, to speak into something, to have their thoughts heard, that's when things really start to change. And I'll tell you when it switched for me, because I used to struggle with this a lot. And people that have been in this organization for a long time probably can almost pick the date on the calendar, right? But I'll tell you what really made the difference for me is when I started looking at things through the lens of my teammates. It wasn't through my lens as the founder, as the chairman, but it was like, okay, how is this playing out for you, Shane, or for you, Jaco, or for you, Rue? And what? Not trying to leverage you, but to create leverage for you, right? Not trying to put you in the box, but to free you from the box. It wasn't so much. It was learning and unlearning at the same time, and it was shifting power and authority and giving people room. And I think that takes us back to an earlier point in the conversation where, trust is earned, or is it trust but verify, or is it just extend trust until someone proves themselves not worthy of it? And then what do you do with that? You kind of dialogue through it and figure out if, you can reach that place of trust, or if you're just not going to be able to get there. So it's really, I think when you get out of your own head and you get out of your own way and you really start thinking of yourself, like I don't look at you folks as working for me. I look at you as working with me, right? And I think organizations that can make that shift, just, I don't know, the culture gets better, the camaraderie gets better, the loyalty gets better, the trust goes up, the service that they provide to clients gets better, because we're creating it together. It's just not one guy cracking a whip, right?
Yeah, maybe it also has to do a little bit with the maturity of a company.
Yeah.
I can imagine. I'm trying to think about the comment that Jacqueline made. I honestly can't think of a company where being open and honest is not welcome. But on the other end, you do get companies who are possibly in survival mode. Where people are very engaged, where they're there for the money. If they could leave, they can. They're scanning for next job opportunities. But what you really want to do is you want to move them up the ladder. You want to give them more security. You want to get. They won't be engaged yet, but you want to get them to a stage where they are starting to be a little bit more interested, not only in themselves but in the team. You want to get them into a situation where they if you look at the hierarchy of Maslow, you have a sense of belonging. You have from a psychological perspective, which is my thing, which I always like to think about. So they get a sense of belonging, and then you really start to engage your employees. But that's not where you want to end. I mean, and to your point, Mike, when you had a feeling of I'm really starting to give away, I'm starting to empower people. I think that was the moment where you started to self-actualize, where you started to get into the role, where you were highly engaged in the business, where you're able to inspire others. That's where you really want to have your employees, be it that it's probably only going to be 5 or 10% of the whole employee population that will ever be, highly engaged in a company.
It's interesting, just kind of staying on Jacqueline's question. So what happens if you're in an organization where there isn't trust? What do you do as a team member in that environment? Do you stay the course? Do you try and lead up? Do you try and influence? Do you say, hey, this isn't good for my personal health, and pull the ripcord and try something different? I mean, how do you navigate an environment? Anybody have experience with being in an environment like that?
I don't think I'll stay very long. And I don't think I've been in it too long, because once it gets to the point where it starts to be draining, I think even at an emotional level, at least for me, I lose all interest. And I think part of the trust is having enough engagement that you still feel like there's something to come to work for. Like you see that light at the end of the tunnel. And just because there's trust doesn't mean there will always be agreements and we will always be aligned. But it's just one of these things. It's like, we just want everybody to be heard. And I feel like if someone is brought into an organization for any given reason, it was because there was some level of talent that was identified in this person, and we wanted that person to be part of the organization. And this can be in any organization. So trust that person to put that talent to use, I think, is what it comes to.
But so like the thought that comes to my mind, because I'm thinking of that question that was asked or that statement that was made about like a low trust organization. It comes down to the like interpersonal relationships, because it's not like the individual trusting the organization as a whole. It's like that specific person they're working with or for that really creates that environment for somebody. And so it becomes not just like an organizational like value or whatever. It's like a no kidding skill almost that managers and people who lead others have to be able to develop. And like what Mike was saying earlier about culture being either like like you either are going to intentionally build your culture or you're going to get what you deserve, which is probably a low trust organization, because unless you're like baking that in,
that's interesting. So like out of all the craziness going on in the world today, one of the positive we can look at is that it literally pulled the future to now. And now that we have so many people working remotely, by default, you need to have this level of trust of saying, are people actually working in their house? I know. Like that's the simplest question. And if so, how do you lead in a remote environment?
It's interesting. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and this is somewhat tongue in cheek, but not really. It's like work at home is work at home. I mean, the environment's changed, maybe there's a little bit more noise, but you know what? You have to trust your people. I've always kind of believed, if you don't trust somebody, why are they on your team? You know, I mean, we talked about you deserve the culture you get. Leaders also deserve the team they build, right? And so, you know, it's one thing to have somebody challenge your point of view, to disagree with you, to be, you know, to have some positional tension or organizational tension. That's just business, right? But if you don't trust them, I kind of question whether or not they should be part of your team. And I think if I'm in an environment where I don't trust my team, I'm kind of like Rue, I'm out of there. You know, I may take a crack or two, you know, to see if maybe this is something that we can just kind of overcome. But if you've really got a toxic environment, you know, it's toxic for a reason. You know, it starts at the top, and, you know, people kind of make choices and they choose to get better or not. And the way you get better in an environment like that, I mean, if you're at the top, you can change it. If you can influence the top, you can change it. You can kind of ignore it down deeper in the organization, just do the best you can within the confines of your ability to maneuver. But at the end of the day, if you don't trust them, you know, you shouldn't be there. You know, it kind of also, this whole remote work thing is interesting to me, because I don't know, I've watched so many organizations. I'll walk into an organization, and, you know, part of what I do is observe, right? Because you can't provide insights and guidance and counsel without a level of understanding, which comes through observation. And so you walk into an organization and you just watch people from the time they land on site to the time they go home, back to back to back to back to back meetings, right? And then they have to go home to get their work done anyway. So, you know, I look at this environment, and what I'm noticing is I think people are actually enjoying having a little bit of white space in their day, right? They're still in meetings, they're still in dialogue, but maybe not in mind-numbing, just, you know, crazy, stupid dialogue, right? I mean, it's dialogue for a purpose. And so I'm kind of excited to watch a lot of organizations go through this transformation, because if they handle it right, trust should go up, outcomes should go up. I mean, everything should get better, because I don't know. I've talked to a lot of executives. They're not going back. You know, they're at home and they're kind of like, I kind of like this. And, you know, I like being around my family, and I like losing the windshield time on commute. And I like having a little bit of white space. And then, you know, some really talented senior executives that I know, they're not going back. They're not spending all their time in 3A. You know, they're not going to log 1 million miles next year. Those days are done. So how organizations are going to deal with that, that's going to be interesting as well, right?
Well, that really raises the point, Mike, about how do you measure employee engagement? Yeah. Because you know, it's something that's always on the plate of HR directors, but it's really actually not their job. This is something this is something that has to happen in the line management. It's something that's being measured maybe once a year. If I look at what's happening now with COVID-19, I think that, and I know that a lot of companies, you know, instead of measuring once a year, they now measuring monthly, weekly even, their employee engagement, and they look at a lot of factors. You know, they look at workload, the workload of people. For some it's less, for some it's more. It has a big impact. You know, the way people are rewarded and recognized at the moment, the management involvement and working conditions, but especially to come back to the point you made on culture. It has a big impact at the moment, how people react and act, not being in their work-related environment, but working from home. Yeah. You know, if you used working in a culture of fear or disrespect, or in a very hierarchical culture, it's very different. You're going to have a very different experience now collaborating with your colleagues. So I think what I would suggest is to get a notion of where we are and what the level of trust is or how engaged my employees are. It's really important to measure this, and even more important is what I do with it, because one of the pitfalls is it gets measured, but it's not shared, or it gets shared but not the full picture, or it gets shared but managers don't act upon it. So it's very, very counterproductive.
I think that's I'm going to put a different twist on that and play with it a little bit, because I don't know. I think measurement, yes, but what you measure and why. Exactly. And I think what people learned over the past decade is that, employee assessments and performance analysis and, lots of time invested in that, lots of money invested in that. What was the return? And I think, I don't know, I think in my profession, there are a lot of people that lead by, okay, how do I identify leaders? And when I hear that, I kind of scratch my head a little bit, because if you have to look for leaders, guess what? They don't exist. Leaders make themselves known. They step up. They're the people that perform, drive outcomes, motivate and inspire teammates. I mean, when you're around leaders, you see it in the fruits of what they do every day. So, when I look at, look, I think psychometric assessments are cool, right? I mean, they give you some data points that you can weave into your overall analysis. But if you're measuring people by dated metrics that kind of look in the rearview mirror instead of out the windshield, if it's all based on, I don't know, self-assessments and how people game, an analytics tool, or the metrics aren't the right metrics, what I'm trying to do is figure out, how can I unleash people, right? How do I find and unlock hidden value? And how do I get resources to people? Because if I do my job right, I don't have to measure their engagement. I see it. I feel it. The organization feels it. Our clients feel it, right? So I don't want to run around and just manage people to death. What I want to do is figure out how to put them in the space where they're floating out of bed in the morning and loving coming to work, because they get to do what they want to do at the highest and best level. It's not like, oh crap, I got to go to work today, right? Yeah, I mean, does that resonate with you guys at all?
So I think this gets me to think, as we tie a couple things together, does remote working becomes the new way you unleash your employees? And I don't know if there's maybe even a generational thing in between to consider. Because I feel, and it's funny because now I'm looking like we have Yako and Mike, and then there's me and Shayna, and I don't know if that was planned, but
method to the madness.
But for me, like, that was one of the things that really attracted me to N2Growth. That 10 years ago, we were doing what the world is being forced to do in the work environment. And I'm thinking now, is this the new way that we think about how do we get great talent? How do we get great young talent that's out there and that now knows I can work for any company and be in any country in the world and be at the beach if I want to, or be at my home desk if I want to? Does this become an incentive to attract great talent?
I think so.
What's happening now. I think you're very, very right, Ro. We are, for all the terrible things that the corona crisis or COVID-19 brings upon us, I think from a management perspective, it's very liberating. And it's liberating maybe the top layers more than those, the youngsters just starting up in business. Because they've been, they grew up with technology. They have a different way of working, taking up responsibilities. I had a discussion with my daughter. She's 14. And she said to me, "Hey, Dad, what a waste of time going to school is." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, I spent 2 hours traveling up and down. I have classes, then the teachers don't pitch. I can go through the next 2-3 years doing it from home. And it's a kind of an interesting analogy, but it opens up the possibilities, a lot of possibilities for future working relationships in companies.
Well, so let me give you a really great example. When I kind of started, really looking at distributed workforces and decentralization and remote work, it just made sense to me right out of the gate, right? Because if you're trying to hire people within, I don't know, an X mile radius of your corporate HQ because you got to manage commute times, all you do is you take a talent universe that's like way out here and you shrink it down to here. And so I look at this and I go, I don't care where people are. I mean, we've got teammates everywhere, right? We've got them in Poland and Romania and South Africa, and I mean, they're everywhere. Alaska. I mean, we have, but these people are amazing, phenomenal teammates that I wouldn't have been able to hire into our organization if we had a different business model, right? Yeah. And so I think the goal isn't get people to come into your cube farm. The goal is to find really amazing people and unleash them. And it's like, Shayna, I think, is a great example. I don't know if I might put you on the hot seat here, but I don't think Shayna's goal is maybe the same goal that everybody on our team has. But I think it's really cool. I mean, kind of give your perspective on what you want out of work and where your head is. Yeah. And, this is what remote working and trust and recognizing talent and unleashing talent can get you. But just, kind of sure what you're after.
So, I mean, I think you're alluding to my desire to live in a tiny house. I'm currently building my own. And ideally, I'd be able to have the flexibility to work from wherever I am because my house is going to be flexible in its location. It was really important to me as I was getting out of the Air Force to find a work situation that was going to be that flexible and enable me to work on this house so that I could finish it and live in it, but then also continue to live that kind of lifestyle. And it's not because I want to be super nomadic. I don't want to have to move my house more often than I want to move it, but having that flexibility to me just shores up my own resilience in terms of where I can live, where I can work. A remote working situation was the right choice for me because I wanted to have that flexibility.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was locking on to more was, you are probably one of the most balanced people that I've had, the chance to get to know because you focus on that, right? You're not going to over-rotate, get sucked into the grind. I mean, you'll be there if your team needs you to be there. Mm-hmm. But you're just not going to get on a hamster wheel and run, and put in 70-hour weeks and grind and grind and grind. That's not your vision for your life. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we were corporate America, I mean, I don't, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think you would have joined us, right? Because it just,
I don't think so.
It means that during the recruitment and during the onboarding, and possibly during the developmental phase of China, something went really well and right with N2Growth. But the question is, Mike, and again, I'm hinting on employee engagement, is how do we retain somebody like China? Because N2Growth is just one of many leadership advisory firms, although I think we do it very differently. But there's a big pull out of the market, from the market, towards highly talented people. So what do we do in our own employee engagement to keep talent like Shayna and Ro and whoever is on board at N2Growth to keep them on board?
So I'll give you an interesting answer to that. So our CEO is somebody here that doesn't want to see any churn. He believes that we're going to create such a dynamic culture and such an engaged workforce, and we're going to get everybody value and vision aligned, and nobody's ever going to leave. And I think what a great state of mind. I don't necessarily agree that we're not going to have churn and that we're not going to lose people because there's a reality to life, right? people change, circumstances change, life events change, and people change and they move, and that's okay. But I think the trick is, staying aligned with your people, making sure that trust exists so that you can kind of understand where they are. And I think, there was a time when somebody left N2Growth that it was like a dagger in the heart. I mean, I was like, what did I do wrong? I failed, and I think I'm to the spot now where I realize that I want to keep people here and I'd like them to remain engaged and productive and part of the team. But if they're feeling like they need to move on to achieve something that they want to achieve, I don't want to be the shackle. I don't want to be the ball and chain around their ankle. I want to help them get to where they want to be, and just have an alumni that's an evangelist for us and what we do. And how we do it.
I think, Mike, that you probably many people will envy you if they hear what you say at the moment. I think this is the point when we talk about separation. When an employee either retires or transitions out of a company, this is where, in my opinion, most management get it wrong. A lot of the discussions I have with employees who circled out or transitioned out, that's the least. It's interesting discussions, but it's you kind of wish that it was handled differently internally. A lot of these employees, when they circle out, we're talking about employee engagement. They felt not valued. They move out and they poison, they blackmouth a company. And what you actually want is you want an employee to circle out and still be almost a disciple of your company, talking about the great time he or she had and the great value that company adds. So I think that in the whole employee life cycle, talking about engagement, the easy part almost is the recruitment part and the onboarding, developing your employees and retain them, but it goes wrong during the separation. And this is maybe a theme that especially in these times of COVID-19, we should take the time and think about how are we going to handle this in the very near future.
So let's take this back to trust again, though, right? I mean, if you've created the right environment and that trust exists, and let's say, Rue, that you've had enough of me, right? You're done with N2Growth. And if I've created the right environment, or maybe you just have an opportunity of a lifetime, right? So maybe there's something here that we just can't work out, or maybe there's something externally that, I don't think my goal should be to retain you. I think the culture should be set up to make retention kind of a natural conclusion, right? Our behaviors, our actions, the trust. But my goal as a leader shouldn't be to say, pass up the lifetime of the opportunity or the opportunity of a lifetime. It shouldn't be to say, oh, ignore this conflict and we'll just get by. I mean, I don't think retention is the right thing. It's like, well, hey, let's talk about it. How do I help you with that? If this is what you want to chase, let's get you to chase it. Because I think if I'm just trying to retain you, I don't know. I don't think I'm leading. I don't think I'm serving you, right? I'm not operating in your best interests. I'm thinking maybe about my polluted perception of my best interests. So I think the whole retention thing, high retention rates really work when you have trust, you have the right culture, you've put people in the right places to do things that they want to do. Retention just happens. But, churn will also happen, and that's okay. So, if somebody, came to you, Shana, and said, hey, I want you to be in charge of my, tiny house manufacturing thing. And, and they were going to pay you $1 zillion a year, and allow you to maintain, the work-life balance. And it's everything you've ever dreamed of. I don't want you sitting here doing this. I want you going and doing that, right?
So Shana, here's an interesting question for you, and I'd like to ask this while Mike is actually in the call.
Oh, okay.
So did you sign a non-compete? Because this is something I don't believe in, but still, we talk about trust, we talk about engaging our employees, we're talking about developing them, and then we start them up with a non-compete, and we make it difficult for them to leave, even though we had a trusted relationship. So I'm interested to get your perspective on it.
I don't believe I did. I mean, it might be my employee agreement, which I did read. I just cannot recall if there was a non-compete section.
You know what, Jaco, I think that's an awesome question, right? Because it's standard in our employment agreements. There is a non-compete for, I mean, for most roles, not for every role, because some roles it's not relevant, but I think my personal thing about non-competes, and it's really to protect the enterprise from bad actors. And shame on us if we let a bad actor through the door. Shame on us if we don't identify them quickly once they're here. But when they depart, I have a fiduciary obligation to protect everybody else, right? So I will share with you that 9 times out of 10, I won't enforce a non-compete agreement. I'll say this publicly, right? Because that person came here in good faith. They operated in good faith. They left in good faith.
Exactly.
No bone to pick, right? They have a right to earn a living. Let them go. Let them flourish. Now, if somebody leaves here with the intent to harm us or to injure us, then I have an obligation to enforce that agreement. Even if it doesn't make any economic sense for me to do it, if I got to spend a bunch of money in legal fees, you do it because you have to protect the enterprise. Yeah. But it's not about restricting people. It's about protecting the people that you have. Does that make sense at all?
No, it very much depends too on which side of the fence you are. Mostly, if you recruit somebody, you the first thing that an HR director asks is, do you have a non-compete? Nobody wants anybody to join with a non-compete. Yeah. But the first thing they get in their contracts is a non-compete. So I'm always having this discussion exactly about trust, from the very first moment, and how you're going to engage your employees. And actually, it's almost like a contract you make with, when you a marriage contract, when you get into a relationship, thinking of how, if in worst case scenario we separate, how are we going to separate? I like to think of it more of in a contractual sense, onboarding somebody or recruiting somebody or onboarding somebody, and then think about how would a potential separation as good actors look like, so that we don't need to have these very stringent non-competes, which I actually don't want you to have when you join me, but I definitely want to give it to you while you're with us.
It's an interesting conversation, right? And again, it's a trust thing, right? I mean, here's one of the things that's difficult. I mean, what we do for a living, we bring people together, right? We bring great talent to great organizations. And one of the things that you don't want to have happen is this real adversarial relationship, this real hardcore negotiation up front, because when the candidate arrives on site and there's baggage that they're carrying into the relationship, that's an unnecessary barrier, right? So, I mean, what you want is equity, right? You want an equitable arrangement that's balanced, that people understand and they appreciate, but you don't want to have adversarial relationships with your teammates, whether it's, starting in the hiring process, whether it's how they're managed, how they're treated, how they're utilized, the perception of, oh, gee, they're leaving, so now they're a bad person. I mean, that's just wrong thinking at every level. And I think that's what organizations, struggle with. So it's like, we have to retain people. You know, you have to treat them well and they'll stay. You know, that's how you retain people.
Well, and it's also about expectation management. So where I see it a lot is if you look at the big four, for instance, the KPMGs, PwCs, Ernst & Young's, Deloitte of this world. You know, each consultant that joins, let's say at the first level, well, it used to be like this in the old days. I think that the new generation it's possibly quite different. But the big prize, the big goal is becoming partner of that firm. That's where people, you know, that's where they're aiming at, that's where they're going at. And when that doesn't happen, that's where these processes derail. So we're talking about engagement, trust. One of the most important things is, especially also in the way that you grow in your company and get more senior positions and to senior levels, is to manage the expectations and also to know if I separate or if I transition out, how that would look like. It's like not postponing, but having it clear in all phases of that employee life cycle.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I mean, I've always thought that like expectation management is gamesmanship, expectation alignment is leadership, right? So if you're just managing expectations, why? You know, align them, you know, have a tough conversation, iron it out, move forward. But, you know, I think the whole titling thing is interesting, right? Because I've often, you know, I've floated this several times amongst our team that we should just eliminate titles altogether, you know, but then, you know, there's a practical, like titles for the sake of titles, you know, and to have some hierarchy and matriculation path. I mean, I couldn't care less about that. You know, in fact, you know, I've got a business card that doesn't have a title on it. You know, I don't care about titles, but I think there's a practical reality that it does kind of, you know, help people identify with where they are in an organization, what they're doing. It gives them, if they do leave, it gives them a track record that they can take forth. But I think organizations look at titles completely improperly. And the big four that, you know, that you mentioned from the accounting and the consulting world, or maybe even the search world, you know, you're a partner. Well, you're an equity partner. Well, you're a non-equity partner, or a senior partner, an associate partner. And it's just like, oh, shoot me in the face. I mean, I hate that kind of stuff. And so I've tried to figure out how to get rid of titles here and still, you know, give people some organizational clarity and give them something. I mean, I had a talk with our CEO the other day about, hey, why don't we just call everybody principal? You know, because everybody here, you know, has an equity, you know, kind of interest in the company now. I mean, that was a big step that we took. You know, it's like, hey, we want people to act like owners and feel like owners. Well, there needs to be meat to that, right? Yeah. But I don't know. These are really interesting conversations. I mean, we've done some really interesting things here over time. And, you know, I've got clients that I've advised over time that, you know, they've gone from, I don't know, proprietary to open source, right? From, I don't know, I guess, horizontal, traditional over matrix to loose collaborative ecosystems, right? I mean, it's a mindset shift, and it's hard to get out of the matrix once you're in the matrix, but it's like a movie analogy in there someplace. But, you know, I think there's a real value to reimagining everything all the time, because companies that thrive know how to reinvent themselves at scale, right? And in order to do that, you have to have trust, and you have to have trust top to bottom, edge to edge. And I don't know, trust is just a big deal. Yeah.
I do agree with that. And I have a question. I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but before we wrap up, I thought it'd be great, since we've been living in this remote working environment, to kind of share, how do you build relationship in this kind of environment? Like, what would be a tip you will share with someone who finds himself in this situation? Because right now, anywhere I go, there's 3,700 articles about what to do remotely, how to look pretty in a camera, what kind of lighting to use. Nobody talks about the people aspect of it. Like, what are some things you can do remotely to develop that trust and that people-to-people connection?
Yeah, I've got a face for radio, so I hate cameras, but it's just kind of it's a part of the world, right? And I don't know that I'm particularly comfortable doing this, but I feel like people need me to do this, right? And so, this is just something I put myself in this chair, and I do this on a regular basis now, and it gets easier. But I'll tell you, this isn't about how you look, because this ain't gonna change. This mug is what it is. But I think it's more about how people feel when they get done in having engagement with you, right? So every engagement is an opportunity to give and take, and it doesn't matter whether it's in person or on a camera. I think the biggest concern that people have about remote work, I think, is being disconnected. I've heard this so many times. Well, I feel like I'm on an island. Well, look, you're only on an island if you choose to burn the boat. I mean, there are so many different ways to engage here. And I actually think you can develop a better relationship in this because, when we're done with a conversation, I'm not going to walk down the hall, look in your office and check to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. I trust that. You have to trust that. And so I think the key is, hire really great people. And, oddly enough, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about values today, but values are more than, something that you print up and you put in a frame and you hang it on a wall, right? You hire people based on values. You work with them based on values. It's the values that creates the trust bond, and so I think a lot of success in working remotely is having a really great team, making sure that you're there for them, staying in touch, but not over communicating, making sure that they have the resources that they need, and then just get the heck out of their way. Let them do what they're gifted at. Don't block them. Get out of their way. Like, Rue, you and I have had design conversations over the years. And, I always, after the fact, have to step back and go, Mike, get out of his way. He's a creative genius. You're a knucklehead. Get out of his way, And so as leaders, that's our biggest challenge, is to get out of our own way and get out of our team's way. So whether you're remote or on site, that's my advice. I mean, Shayna, thoughts?
Well, I was going to actually ask Rue, because aside from you, I think he's been part of N2Growth for the longest. And so I'm interested, what kinds of conversations, what has kept Rue here, over however many years he's been at N2Growth?
He's a glutton for punishment.
No, I think it's multiple things. For me, it's just the liberty of time. And for me, in the past 6 months alone, I think I've worked from 4 different continents. Not many organizations offer you that ability. And the fact that you made that face proves it. You didn't even know I was gone, because I didn't work the same way that I did. And I think that is valuable. But then I also want to give a practical kind of advice. If you find yourself working remotely, I think something that's extremely beneficial nowadays is create your own water cooler environment. Because I know in a traditional office, you have that. And in this digital world, you may be alone in your house, or you have kids around. What do you do to connect with your teammates in a different way? And some of the things we've done here at N2 that works really, really well are 2 major things. On Friday evenings, we literally have a happy hour where everybody joins a Zoom call. They're not necessarily talking work. They might, but it's just a moment for everybody to talk. They may have a drink in their hand or not. I don't know. I won't confirm that. But in addition,
you won't deny it either.
And another thing you can do also is we literally have group chats where everybody can see. And one of the ones we have is called Fail Wall. Literally just post whenever somebody put their foot in their mouth or did something awkward or weird, we'll just post it and everybody gets to chime in. And it kind of creates this dynamic of having these discussions that are no longer all about work.
Yeah.
You get to connect on a person-to-person level, and you can still create that in a digital environment. I would just say just get creative with it and create your own water cooler.
I think an important aspect of that is buy-in. Like everybody on the team wants to be connected. I think that is a huge part of our success here at N2Growth, is that, like Mike was saying, you attract the right people, you build the right team, and the connection happens because everybody is trying to make it happen. And I think that's a really important aspect of culture, is like when you do get aligned on your values, on your goals, you're able to achieve them as a team, whether you're physically located together or distributed across the world. Like you just have to have that connection.
You know, this is really interesting because we've been in this environment for a long time. So it's more natural for us. And just by the way, Shayna, Jitendra has been here the longest. He was employee number 3, I think.
Right.
But, you know, it'd be interesting to get Jitendra's perspective on this topic, because he's seen us from the beginning all the way through. But I'll tell you that the thing that's maybe most interesting to me about this topic of remote work or retention or trust or anything, I think the workforce as a whole will adapt pretty naturally. I mean, people, you know, they might like certain things about remote work or not like certain, but they're mostly going to adapt. You know who's going to struggle the most? Leadership. Because they have to, you know, they have to completely reorder their world. I mean, if you take somebody like Rue, if you were doing your creative work in a cube in an office building, and you're doing your creative work in an environment that you've created for yourself, like you are now, I mean, you're probably going to like what you do better in a self-created environment with more autonomy and more flexibility and all the engagement, albeit maybe different, but you're going to make that transition just fine. The people that are going to struggle are the people with the big old titles and the big old offices that are used to having people march into their conference room on the hour, every hour, all day long, and conducting their symphony in that environment, right? That game has changed, and those are the people that I think are going to struggle, because I'm hearing that, you know, I'm talking to these folks all day long, and some of them, you know, that got it before, that were switched on before, okay, environments changed, I'm still switched on, they make the transition. But those creatures of habit, those people that are like kind of deer in the headlights, it's like, wait a minute, you know, how do I do this? I mean, those are the people that are going to struggle.
So what would you share to someone to find themselves in those shoes?
You know, I think, you know, leaders that don't adapt are going to be replaced by those that do, period. You know, and I think, I don't know, I'm old enough, I've had to kind of reinvent myself a few times and, you know, unlearn a lot of things along the way, as well as learn things along the way. But, you know, I think that's what leaders do, is they adapt for the benefit of their team, right? It's not about them. It's, you know, I don't learn new things because, I mean, yeah, I find it interesting, but I mostly, it's like, how do I operationalize that for the benefit of my team? So you got to get out of your own head. You got to get in the head of your workforce that probably, you know, might be a little shaky right now. New environment, lots of unknowns orbiting around in their universe. Maybe health concerns have already impacted them, or the fear that they might. So how do you get out of your own head and lead them to a place of trust, safety, and security, right? That's what they have to do. That's the mindset that they have to adopt.
I think we can make that a topic for next week. How do you get out of your own head?
Yeah.
And I know we're getting hit to the top of the hour, so I don't know if you have a few more comments, but I think that would be a good one to come back to next Tuesday. How do you get out of your own head? And we can talk about it from multiple layers within an organization.
Yeah, I think that'd be awesome. Well, hey, look, this has been fun. I mean, I think we probably could talk about this until the cows come home, but you know, we actually have to get back to our jobs and let our viewers get back to their jobs. But this is you know, this has been fun. I enjoyed it. Thanks for showing up, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Until then, you can tune in every Tuesday at 11 a.m. We'll have a different panel, different topic. Be here, enjoy it, and have fun. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye to the team.